Hi, welcome to Havilah's podcast. I'm your host, Havilah Cunnington. I am so excited that you're here today because we are going to hit a topic that I think is critical when it comes to sexuality in our homes, in our churches, in our marriages, and in our own personal world. I love that we're just going to hit this topic because there's been a lot of we talk around this topic, we kind of mention the idea of it, but we never just hit it head on and no, we need to talk about this. And I think the more honest we are, the better we're going to be and the more healthier we're going to be. So today we're going to talk about porn. We're going to talk about porn in our lives, porn in our marriages, porn in our homes. And should we even be maybe even engaging in porn, even if we're married and our spouse says yes? I mean, we need to really talk about that. But then also, I think there's a lot of us that are dealing with some aspect of porn. Now, I know statistically that 9 out of every 10 men in our faith cultures, this isn't just out there, like in our churches, 9 out of 10 men are currently looking at pornography, and 7 out of 10 women are currently engaging in pornography. So this isn't like a them and out there. This is a us and we. And so I just have to say, if we're going to do a series on sexuality, we got to talk on this topic. And I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation with than a friend of mine, and his wife is one of my best friends. Aaron Zent is here. And here's the cool part. Aaron and I obviously have been friends, but I've been on the inner world of his life because I'm best friends with his wife. And so we have been friends for many, many years. And of course, she doesn't share her secrets, but we do share our marriages, we share our lives. And I've watched Aaron going from just mentoring men to writing a book on the topic to becoming really a leading voice in our community on this topic. I have his book. I've given his book to my boys. Each of my boys, not the littles yet, but the big boys, to read through, to look at. And his book is entitled From Numb to Known, Breaking Free of Porn. I hope I got that right.
Close enough.
I know, Breaking Free of Porn. That's what you should have titled it.
Okay,
no,
thanks,
but Aaron is a dad of 3, 2 girls and a boy. Him and his wife are leaders in our church, and he runs a men's group. But most importantly, Aaron is just a man that has stayed on this topic. And I want to just say this right now. I don't think that, again, this is my opinion. I don't think porn is something that we just check off and we're like, good, solved, done. I think it's a tension that we manage because we are in an over-sexualized culture. We are constantly being inundated with images and all kinds of things. And so I think it's something that we have to actually take an assessment, value our lives, value what's happening in us, and not be naive to how quickly it can come into our world and the power of it. So I'm not going to preach, but I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for having the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're a brave man.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Although you're married to Jenna.
Yeah,
so I think you're going to be okay.
It of me.
That's right. I do feel like I'm not going to overwhelm you because of who you're married to. But okay, so let's talk. You and I joked about it because I said, what do I call you? And you're like the porn guy, which we were joking. But
Sure.
The truth is that this is one of those topics that people don't talk about. How did you get on this topic? How did this become something in your world?
Well, because I used to be the porn guy, in not the great sense that I now use it, because this was very much my experience growing up from 7 years old when I first saw it, and having sexual experiences even before that, which is all part of what creates the current mindset for many men is what they experience at a very young age, when your brain was incredibly malleable, and then it affects the way that you experience relationships. It affects the way that you deal with your own emotions.
Right.
And so that was my experience going into going through high school, going into ministry school, getting married, still dealing with this,
absolutely.
Even in the midst of that. I thought each of these different milestones in my life would change this because I didn't understand what was behind it. And so I go, okay, maybe when I get married, then I'll have all the sin-free sex that I want, and that's going to solve the problem because I just apparently I just need sex so much. And then it didn't, and I was like, well, that's weird. Okay. And then I thought, when I have my first kid, then it'll be like the gravity of this is going to weigh on me so much that I'll know that. And I just was misunderstanding what was driving the behavior, and therefore misapplying. Well, I actually didn't apply anything. I was just kind of waiting for something to change for me.
Oh, it's so brilliant, Aaron. I'm like, yes, let's talk about it. So on average, I think kids, but boys specifically are exposed, I think around 6 and 7,
It's
right?
the statistics keep getting younger and younger.
Younger and younger. When you were first exposed to porn, was it something that you knew what it was? Was it, and did you immediately feel like lured into it?
Yeah, it was, well, so I had my first sexual experience when I was 4 with an older kid. And obviously the older kid was the one who introduced that experience.
Right.
And so there was a bit of priming before I saw porn to like kind of, I had an hypersexualized childhood, having some multiple experiences between the age of 4 and 7. So that when I saw porn, it was this like, oh, this is kind of that thing.
Yes.
Like there's that we're not supposed to do, we're not supposed to see, but it's here and it's looking like everybody here is excited about it. And like this is made for me, even though I found it in the trash, you know, so there was an alluring there, but I was pretty primed for it. I've heard other experiences of men and women who saw it for the first time and they didn't have a primed sexualized experience prior to that, but it did something like sometimes it just freaked them out. Like, but there was something about it that was like curiosity drove them back to it. So there's a myriad of experiences that people can have, but that one was mine.
I that's what I found. We ran More Evolution for years and years and years, and just the research alone, it's within our innate nature to be curious, and then it hooks us, and we don't know even that what's happening.
Right.
So then you go into the classic, I think, Christian experience, which is once I, get married, have a kid, confess it, I'll be free. And what happens is, and why is that not working? Because I saw that my whole childhood, they would have the guys go to a different room, the girls go to a different room, and why I'm different. They would confess. But I saw that in my own just relationships, people weren't getting free. They were getting free for a minute, but then they would go back into the cycle. So I'm curious, why wasn't that working? And why hasn't it worked?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental idea behind confession a lot of times comes from the scripture, like confess your sins to one another, then you'll be healed. And there's the idea that confession is the answer. Confession is a incredibly necessary part, but it's not what does the healing per se. So what is helpful is to get some of the things that we feel ashamed about into the light. And that is part of what confession, it just brings clarity. It brings love, hopefully with the people you're confessing to. But what's missing behind that is the renewing of the mind part, which if you take renewing of the mind down to a scientific level, there's some neurobiological experience that needs to happen for most people who are dealing with some kind of compulsive behavior. And that kind of healing that is necessary, that needs to happen, that renewing is something that has to happen ongoing, especially if you have carved a pathway in your brain for some of the guys that I work with are in their 70s dealing with it. So you got guys anywhere from like, I've been dealing with this for a year to 40 plus years or more. And when you repeat that kind of behavior over and over and over, it habituates your brain, your body. It habituates the way that you think and the way you relate to people.
It does.
So we need to actually change. There's a lot of things that need to change. Sometimes there are very small things that need to change consistently. Sometimes there are big healing moments that need to change, because when you have traumatizing experiences, which any kid experiencing sexuality under a certain age is really experiencing a traumatic event. It's something their brains are not structurally developed to hold on to and to know what to do with.
That's a good point.
Now, you could, as a kid, experience that and have adults in your life who can walk you through that. A lot of that would look like removing shame from that, letting them know that, hey, you're not the bad that you're feeling or that you're seeing. This is what this is for, and kind of creating a safe structure for them to feel and heal. But when you don't have that, you actually need to go back and do some of the work that needed to be done originally.
So basically taking the time to go back and nurture that little boy or little girl that was exposed and really abused in a sense and traumatized. So when you say there's big moments and small moments, let's talk about that practically. Okay. So you're saying if somebody has a repentant time at the altar call and weeps and confesses, there's still value in that.
Oh, yeah.
But you still have to do the small stuff as well.
Correct.
But maybe I want to go back even further, which is it impulsive for everybody? Do certain men and women have, it's more of an addiction than others? And what are you finding? Because you work with a lot of different people. What's more common and what's something that you go, actually, that's unique to you?
Sure. I would say that this is a common question, like, am I addicted, or do I just like every once in a while struggle? And some of the reasons for that question is where the problem is, I think, because sometimes that question is this actually an issue in my life? And I go, hey, if you have this in your life at all, once a year, once every 3 years, and you don't want it, it's a problem. It doesn't matter if you call it addicted or not. Now, obviously, when it's way more frequent, then you're going like, okay, there's an acuity to this problem that needs a different kind of attention than the once every a year kind of guy. However, a problem is a problem. So let's look at what is driving that behavior to begin with. Because a guy who's once a year, it's still the same mechanisms, but for whatever reason, he has a different threshold from which those things build up pressure and need the release of going and escape like porn. Whereas the guys who are like once a day, there's a buildup of pressure, but there's also a lot of other things that have to be dealt with. So the way that I would go about it would be different. However, saying, is this guy addicted, or is this guy an addict, or does he just have a struggle? I actually find that irrelevant to
I really like that when we're asking, because this is what's going to happen. We're always going to diminish something when we feel embarrassed about it or ashamed,
totally,
right?
yeah.
So we're going to be like, I'm not addicted, but
I'm not like that
I'm
guy.
not like that.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't even know what that guy is. We don't even know a part of that.
Yep.
But what I found, at least in ministering with people in their sexuality, is that they're not free. They're just in cycles. So they have like a month, right? So people go, I'm free. And you're like, no, you actually every 3 months get into this. You're not free. You're just in a cycle, and you let your foot off the gas, and then you happen again.
Yes.
So for those that are watching, I love that idea that we don't want to filter it in. If you're not addicted, you're fine. Or if you only look at it once in a while. I love that when you don't have power over something. I love that. So let's go into, how did you, because again, culturally, porn is very much an elevated, masculine, it's fine. Every guy looks at it. Every girl now who's empowered, the empowerment method of women, I get to look at it too. But how did you begin to see the evidence of it being damaging?
Sure. Yeah.
And then how did you begin to unpack, like, how do I get free from this? Because I bet you asked questions differently. Like you kept asking the wrong question until you asked the right question, I assume.
Exactly. Yes. All right. So there is cultural, societal, like research that has been done around pornography and its effects on the human brain. So one thing that we know is that it's called a supernormal stimulus. So you have this spike of dopamine that takes you, like, let's say you're out of a baseline, then you have like this line up here would be like, I feel alive. Like, I'm just like, this is great. Dopamine, the spike that'll happen in your brain takes you way past that, which is the feeling of being high, which is really the only other correlated, it would be something like drugs, like cocaine or things like that. And so when that happens, if that didn't have any negative consequences, that would be awesome. Like, but what happens after that is your body works to seek equilibrium, and it drops you way below baseline.
Wow.
And in fact, when you get a over dump of dopamine among other chemicals, the receptors in your brain go like, we actually don't need as many receptors in order to take this. So they start like pulling back the receptivity to it, which means that you don't get the same high the next time, which is what increases many times guys or people struggling get to, I'll do air quotes, worse and worse porn, or they go to things that progressively intense, progressively violent, progressively things that, even blow further beyond their core values for a number of different things that they go, I would utterly never. Disgusted by this. And now this is the only thing that works for me. So we know that that's what it does to the brain. And so the same way that we would go, I guess if somebody takes drugs and then never does it again, like they're going to be mostly okay. But when this is repeated, that's what does literal damage to the brain. Society-wise, we can see that the increase in sex trafficking is specifically correlated to children seeing porn at a young age. And with that, increasing a dependency on that, which then begins to transform to, I need something outside of the screen. I need something more and bigger. So we can see sex trafficking and things that we know are literally damaging human lives in our world. That is not just human empowerment. I've had people tell me like, well, I just watch, ethically sourced porn. And then we have
like ethically sourced coffee.
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is not a blood diamond. It's lab grown. You go like, okay. And at the same time, even just on a neurological level, it is unhelpful for the human brain to experience that, because you also you lose your ability to experience normal life. Well, like you lose your ability to walk outside and go, what a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Because the things that are mechanisms in your brain to be able to detect beauty and to detect connection with people are suddenly dulled when you have this huge dump. And so the testimony I've heard from many guys, I've experienced it myself, is as I start getting free from this, a lot of this testimony is just so great. They walk outside and they're like, wow, look at the colors. I never noticed the colors before. And so I've heard that multiple times, because it's guys' brains resetting for the first time, and they can begin to experience intimacy with their wife that isn't, sometimes they can experience sex for the first time that is fulfilling, because it actually isn't, it's never going to match porn. It can't.
Wait, let's talk. What does that mean? Because it's purely, what you're viewing is purely self-serving?
There's a number of reasons why we go to porn and not, say, our wives. Because I had this experience. I showed up in my small group. Oh, I looked at porn. I'm confessing it again. And I was married. And so one of the guys in my small group who was single, he's like, why didn't you just like go have sex with your wife? If you were like feeling horny. I was like, okay. Great question. As I began to dive into it, I go, oh, what was driving me to porn was not a physiological experience of being aroused. It was a feeling of powerlessness and this is just in this particular moment, but it was true for a lot of it. Man, I felt super powerless. I had this happen at work. I had this happen at home. And I just felt like I had no control over anything. Yes. And porn will deliver an intimacy that requires zero risk, which isn't real intimacy.
Ooh, Aaron, stop right. That is profound. So it delivers what you need without requiring any exchange,
without any sacrifice.
It always produces for you. Yeah. It always gives you what you're coming to look for. It shows up, which a wife can't, a husband can't. It's impossible to show up at that level.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the need wasn't an orgasm. The need was a release of whatever feelings of inadequacy, insecurity, stress, whatever it might be. This is profound. Like, I hope our listeners are hearing this, because to me, I know this because we've taught on this, but it really comes down to core needs rather than sex. That's why your wife or your husband in bed isn't going to do it. So that's really important, because I think a lot of people feel shame. And when they say my husband or wife has a porn addiction, they go, oh, well, why is that person not showing up in bed for them? Are they not available? Right. And it really is just more shame, because it's not a sex issue. And I don't think people understand that. Yeah. So I'm sorry, not to interrupt, but can we go back to that part when you said it's never going to be that for me in the bedroom like it does on the screen? How do you manage that then? That feels a little helpless to go, that it doesn't produce like that.
It does when you think about, that experience where my dopamine spikes to that level. You're saying I can never get back there. And I go, yeah, that's actually not the experience of being alive. That is, I don't know how to describe that experience other than like, that's not what you were made for, because experiencing it up there always comes with the crash. And that is the part where I go, hey, when you experience real intimacy and connection with your wife, you don't have the same like kaboom. There is going to be moments of euphoria in sex. Like that's going to happen for sure, where you go like, that felt the same. Really what I'm getting at is that when we experience intimacy that requires risk, it requires some sacrifice, these moments of powerlessness, I don't go to sex to feel powerful. Right. I go there to lay down my power. But when I experience intimacy in the midst of laying down my power, in the midst of risking being hurt by my wife, the high that I get, it goes boom right up to that alive level, but then it just doesn't drop after that. And it obviously every time you experience something big and euphoric or exciting, it does taper off. But man, you can live off like days and weeks, and this is the experience of like being connected to people. Is man, I can go from a hangout with friends where I feel truly known by them, and I can go just like. The next day and the day after that, I'm like, oh, and then I go get some more connection, and then it just like keeps increasing this line, but it doesn't do this. Woo! Yes. Oh man.
Yes, like a drug. So like you're never going to get high. You're right. You're not going to have the high.
You and me will never experience what meth can do.
Right. Right.
I hope
not. Havilah, but the high, exactly. But the hype is, you might get a runner's high, exercise high, or vacation high, or whatever. Yeah, but it's that level of like, but I was fully present. I wasn't medicated. I
Yes.
wasn't like having a toxic experience.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, I that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's important because everyone's thinking like, well, how am I gonna get that high? And
Yeah,
I'm
how
getting
do I
over here.
they go, well, how do I replace that so that I can get that without doing it? And I go, unfortunately, the thing that you think you want isn't the thing you want. The thing you think you want of I want to feel that again. Actually, most of us just don't want to feel what we're feeling down here. And so we've said, I really don't want to feel this loneliness. I really don't want to feel this this sadness, this powerlessness. And so I'm going to hit this button. It's going to skyrocket me, but then I'm going to drop back below baseline after that. What we really want is just to not feel this. And so when you begin to experience life like above the line there, where you go, oh, I'm getting my core needs met on a regular basis, there's no need to jump up to ask.
So it's escapism.
Yeah.
I'm going to go into a virtual world. I'm going to experience, but when I come back, I've now exited out of my real life. It's just as bad as it was before, but now I'm ashamed because I exited, or I'm 3 days later.
Right.
It's I've never thought of it like that. It's very, very profound. So you started to say, yeah, you have these incremental healings, significant, and then smaller healings. Let's go into, actually I want to go, before we do that, I do want to get into, how did you know that it was another need? How did you know? Because that takes a lot of self-awareness. And I know when we used to travel and preach on sexuality, we would say the HALT word, or, HALT, which is like, are you hurting, lonely, angry, or tired? We used to say, ask the question, what do I need? Before you go call that guy and, go find him at night, or before you go do whatever, or before you go look at porn, ask the question, what do I need?
Yeah.
So that journey was probably not a straight line for you. How did you learn to do that?
It was actually, so I was a part of this men's group that I now run at Bethel. And so it was being in that group and not feeling like I'm getting any traction for like a year in the group. And it was these moments where like, I'd have my small group leader go like, hey, what kind of pain do you have in your life? I'm like, none. I have a great life. Like I have a good wife. I, like good job, all this stuff. And he goes like, okay, interesting. We'll come back without looking at porn this week. And then let me know if you have any pain. And I just kept coming back and I'm like, well, I looked at porn and I don't have any pain. But so there was this moment, and this is one of those like big, punctuating moments where suddenly I realized it was a moment in really getting vulnerable where I go, oh, I actually feel a ton of pain about, and I started listing these things out. I had no idea that it was that big. And the reason why I really knew it is because I started weeping as immediately as the words came out of my mouth. And so then I go, oh, okay, I guess there is a bunch of pain in there. So that was one thing that told me I'm not always totally accurate about my self-assessments. And so this is why I rely on other people to help lead me into that. So then I'm in the small group, I realize some pain. So I start processing through that pain and it starts to change things. It wasn't an immediate like, oh no, I'd never want to look at porn again. But I began to feel this connection with my wife. I began to feel connection with other guys that I hadn't felt before. And then it was in the process of discovering other aspects like, man, I feel incredibly powerless. I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. I never want to, make anyone upset. And I work in HR. So I'm like,
the irony.
I can't do my job very well because I'm constantly going like, yeah, I know you violated this.
How do I keep the peace by also telling you?
I would just basically, as I'm writing somebody up, I'm like, I know you didn't mean to do this. This is just a formality.
Right.
Nobody ever changed their behavior when I did that. Yeah. Yes. So I had a counselor that, and these are years apart, but I had a counselor that goes, hey, I think you're more addicted to passivity than you are to porn. And I was like,
that's fascinating.
Okay. So he goes, why don't you go tell your boss, I want to be a part of every firing and written warning that you have. Yeah, I want to get better at that. And I was like,
that's horrible.
No, I said yes because I didn't want to, I'm a 9. I didn't want to disappoint him. This is where it helped. But I did that for like 6 months. I was the guy who wrote people up and fired them.
Wow.
And it was a little bit of exposure therapy, but here's really the thing. I remember firing this person. It was totally the right thing to do. She was crying and super upset and threw the pen down and stormed out. And this was like after a couple months of doing it. And the guy that was with me, who was like my witness, we always have like a second. He's like, oh man, that was so hard. And I remember thinking, I feel great right now. Why do I feel great? And I realized, oh, it's because that random person no longer has power over me. And I had given my power away for so long through not realizing that I thought I was just a likable guy, except I was just a guy that everyone liked because I was what they liked. You know, I wasn't myself. So I realized, oh man, I actually feel powerful. And it was in that process that I started losing my desire for porn.
Wow.
How did I know that? Well, I'd go like a few weeks and go, oh, I felt tempted just now, but it's actually been a while since I felt that, like I need this or this overwhelming desire. So I realized these things that don't seem to be related are affecting this.
Yeah.
I wonder if they are related.
Wow.
So, and it was a slow process. So now what I do with my book, with the online small groups that I do with the men's group, is that's what we go after. So yes, there are habits, there are very practical things to breaking a porn addiction that are very necessary, like getting porn blockers and doing different things.
Right.
And when we start addressing the isolation, the passivity, and the pain in our lives, and we actually go after those, we actually begin to lose the thing that's been driving it to the surface, driving our need for porn to the surface. So it was a 10-year process of discovering that.
I cannot believe how you clawed your way out of this. Like, I just hearing you talk about this journey, like I can hear it in you. Like you've had to claw your way out of this. Like this is not a normal, like this would have had you. This would have been your story. This would have been who you were. And the fact that you have fought this in a way that for a 9, but also just as a man, I mean, I just could only imagine to go into your needs, to go into what you, I mean, just all that. Has it helped helping other men? Has that been important for you?
Honestly, like one of the most helpful things I've ever done. And you see this in recovery groups. Yeah. They go, hey, their 12th step is usually go give away the thing that you got. Yeah. And it's not because, you know, they want to spread the message about their group. It's because they realize that when you give stuff away, you're actually getting so much more in return. I think that's biblical. Like, yeah. So honestly, so helping guys, one has, given me the sense of purpose, given me the sense of power and identity, but it is also, it reminds me. That is the thing that I keep going back to these small groups and I hear these guys' stories and I go, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, that's me too. Oh yeah, that's me too. Oh yeah, this is why it's worth connecting with somebody when I have a bad day at work. This is why it's worth connecting with somebody when my tax bill is humongous, because I know that I can see it in all these guys that right there, unprocessed in isolation, leads to all this rationalization that leads to me acting out. And so it's just a great reminder every time, besides actually feeling like I'm doing what the Lord's called me to do. I literally go, oh yeah, constantly.
I just think about, I always said, all of us need 12-step programs because there's something in our life, whether it's food, whether it's shopping, whether it's alcohol, whatever it might be, like we really need community and to like unpack our crap in community. Like it's just what it is. So there are ones that are watching right now that are, their husband is in porn and they know it. They don't talk about it. It's his private world. But they know, like, I feel powerless as a wife. What do I do? Yeah. Well, if you don't want that in your marriage, you have, like, I would say you do need to say, I don't want this in my marriage. So starting with that.
Let's start with that. Like, if you go, this is not what I want, even if your husband, whoever it is in the relationship decides, like, this is okay for me. I'd say the majority of the people that I talk to is somewhere along the lines of, he struggles every once in a while. And he like catches up with some guys. And so he'll tell them when he struggles or whatever. Yeah. But that, I'll feel very helpless outside of that. There's always a tension between, you can make requirements of your relationship. Like when I hold up my end of our relationship and you hold up your end, part of you holding up your end is that you're not going to sexualize other women. And so I can go, hey, that's important to me. I need you to do something about that. It's okay to say that. In fact, the majority of no, that's not true. A number of guys that come into our group or that I work with are there because their wives were the ones that gave them the push. Because a lot of these guys who don't want this have felt powerless to do anything about it. So you can say, I want you to do something about it. But also I always tell the guys, and I tell the wives the same thing, like, require a plan. Like, hey, I want to hear a plan. Because guys that go, I'm not going to do it again. I go, how?
Right.
And they go,
I'm going to just cold knuckle it. Right.
Yeah. They have a lot of like, I'm going to, because I feel like I don't want to right now.
Right.
That's never going to stick unless you do something different about what's actually driving that behavior. So requiring a plan. Now, most of the time they don't know what a plan. They don't, well, if I knew the plan, I would do it. And I would say the plan for every person should be, you need to get in some sort of community in which you're talking about this with regularity. Because the one accountability partner that the only reason you use them is to confess that you acted out is never going to change anything. And so these, I'd say the reason I structure almost everything I do in small groups that meet weekly is not just to get there and confess and then go, man, that like I did that, I'm going to try not to do it again this week. It is to go, hey, what are all the things that happen in your heart? What are all the things that happen relationally that were difficult? What are the great things? All of those things play a part in this. So let's get to those things so that we can actually begin to change what's driving it. So I would say get in a group. That would be the plan, is get in a group to start. Baseline. Yeah. There's a lot that can be done when you're in a group that will affect how effective it is, but that is the baseline. That's
the big one. Okay, what about marriages where porn is in the marriage, right? And kind of the core concept is, well, we both, he likes it, I watch it too, I enjoy it too. Like, is there damage in that? Is that dangerous?
Neurologically, yes, it's dangerous. I'd say relationally, yes, it's dangerous. I always frame things in, is this helpful or unhelpful? And it really depends on what your goal is. So if your goal is to not rock the boat, if your goal is to have a marriage where we both just kind of get through it, then porn could be helpful if that's your goal. If your goal is to have intimacy and connection, if your goal is to follow Jesus, then those things are unhelpful. And so if you have two people that go like, we're good with it, we're good with where we're at, you can't help somebody who doesn't have a problem. So like I could say this is a problem, they go, no, it's not. And I go, okay, have a great, enjoy. But I just haven't found that to ever be the case. So yeah, I would say find out what your goals really are. Because if you sometimes will just know what your goals are based on your behavior. So if your behavior in your marriage is like keep the peace, then you will fight to protect that. If that means just letting porn be a thing, you will let that be a thing. But if your goal is something different, if you want your goal to be something higher, better, I would say like intimacy and connection, then that's unhelpful.
And ultimately, and you mentioned this a little bit, but that what they found was that your neural pathways, the way that you can be so addicted, you mentioned this, but your brain begins to be so dependent on that product. So, Hugh Hefner, they did research and they found that he had to have pornographic material in the bedroom for him to climax because his brain was so accustomed. He had all these beautiful women around, all these, as much sex as he wanted, but he needed that. So that just tells you how damaging this product is in our life, because we could have everything right. The most beautiful spouse, the most sexy spouse. It's really not about them. And I know that's hard 100%. To explain to a lot of people, but it's just not a reflection of them. It just isn't. It's a reflection of what's going on inside. Just like what we do, if it's, I have to have another drink or I have to go, whatever it might be. It's just that it's an impulsive thing, which usually we're running from something. So I'm curious, shame keeps a lot of people stuck. So someone goes, I have a porn problem. And this is what I found. When I travel, somebody will say to me, I have a porn problem, or my spouse does, what do I do? And, or I told somebody and they were like, yeah, my spouse does too. There's like this cultural thing of like, no one's really free and no one knows what to do about it. So you're saying getting into a group that can be, does it have to be in person? Can it be online? Can it be with a therapist? Like, where does people start to get that? Yeah,
I would say it's always ideal if you can be in person, but you can certainly do online. The idea is I need to get known. That is, and the title of my book, Numb to Known, is the experience that of being addicted to porn is the experience of being unknown, because you are because of the shame, you naturally want to hide everything that's going on. And not just, here's what I did, I want to hide that, but it's actually a hiding of all the other vulnerable emotions. Like, I feel scared about this. I feel sad about this. Those things have been hidden for so long. I do reach for this. I feel shame about it. Then I hide that. So I would say literally telling somebody the things that you're scared to tell somebody, whether it's a therapist or in a small group, online or in person, that is key.
Like getting it out of you.
You have to get it out. It's really the only antidote to the thing that says hide is to not hide. And all the way back to the garden, the Lord is like, hey, where are you? Oh, we're hiding. Yeah. The only antidote is to get out of the bushes in the light.
So good. So you wrote this book, From Numb to Known. Why did you write the book? And what, like, I think it's an incredible book. I've read it, but I'm just curious, and the journey, people are listening, who's it for? Who needs to read it, and why did you write it?
Right. So I wrote it because as I began to see these things in my life, and then I'm leading this group, and I'm going, oh, these are the same things. Like, obviously there's going to be like things about adventure and things about like different spiritual connections with the Lord or people that you need. But so these are these primary things that I've seen when we go after that, we begin to see change happen. Yeah. And so as I go, oh, I think I can boil that down to these 3 primary things. So I go, well, if it's that simple, it's simple in ideation, but it's really the difficulty in enacting and implementing, going about changing those things. But I go, oh man, this would have been helpful for me to know at the outset. Yeah. And so I go, okay, if I can at least start guys here, it's always going to be a journey. Like my story is little bits of better over a long period of time. Which some guys will have this, big experience and then never again. That hasn't been my experience. Yeah. And for the majority of people, it is a process. But if I can start that process with going after the primary things, we can save a ton of time. Yeah. So that's why I wrote it. It is like I wrote it because of my own experience and not having experience helping women with porn. It is written towards men. If I was to work with a woman who's struggling with porn, which I wouldn't, I would hand that to my wife. Yeah. But I would say the same things because fundamentally it's a human condition that we are anesthetizing with porn. And so it's going to be true male or female, but I did write it specifically for men because that's who I was working with.
Yeah, it's an excellent resource. And those of you that are listening to this, you can go on Amazon and find it today. It's From Numb to Known. And I think it's a great conversation, even for your spouse. If you're like, hey, I heard this podcast, here's a book, and just let them start there. Because I think, and you said in the beginning, but I think it's really important. If we don't start with empathy for ourselves, we will not get whole. So, there's a part of me, even as a wife, when my husband struggled with porn, if I wasn't empathetic and I was righteous, or I was better, or I didn't do that, there's always a wedge the enemy wants to bring. Oh yeah. And so when we're really aware that we're one choice away from blowing up our own lives, I feel like it really keeps us humble. Like I'm one choice away. You're one choice away from blowing up our whole lives. Yeah. So no one's better than anybody else. This is a vulnerability that we're going to work toward and get healthy. And we've seen freedom in our marriage, but again, I respect him for that because that takes work. And I've seen people get free, but the truth is, if you get free, it doesn't mean like if you go back, it's harder to get free, the Bible says. So again, a having a plan, just having a strategy, not being naive, not being stupid. The other month a couple months ago, I was in a hotel room and I was just flipping through the channels. And all of a sudden, it's like 11 o'clock at night, wasn't looking for anything. And immediately there's porn on the TV. And I grew up in a home. I'm a girl, but I didn't have a lot of exposure to porn at all. But here I am, I'm sitting there and I am just first like, wait, is this really happening? But then I'm thinking like, you immediately have this thought of no one's here. It doesn't really matter if I want to look. I mean, I've never seen this. So let's look at this. And then obviously turning it off, but realizing like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting assaulted. I'm not even looking for it and it's coming at me. And I think instead of being shameful of like, oh my gosh, I called my husband and go, babe, you would not believe what I just saw, and he wanted me, I'm like, no, I'm not going to describe it to you. But I'm like, I can't believe it. But I think there's a part of it that's just being open rather than like going, oh my gosh, and then hiding it, being like, that was weird. Or I know with our boys, one of the things we were taught was when you see soft porn, whether it's a bathing suit magazine or whatever, you actually have to title it. So we go, oh, that's pornography, and actually labeling it for your kids rather than just going, oh, that's yucky or that's not good. Just like, yeah, that's pornography. It's out there. So anyway, those are just some thoughts I have for parents and wives and, really sharing that. I don't want to hear everything my husband deals with in the sense of like, I don't need all the nitty gritty. And I've seen spouses do that where they go into everything.
Unhelpful,
and I think right? So how much do you share? That's probably a good question.
Yeah, I literally was working through this one question with a coaching client the other day. And it was here's what I really want to get after is what is the wife actually asking for? Not what is she asking for, but what is she actually asking for? She wants, many times when you feel really anxious about what somebody else is doing, the way that you ease that anxiety is you get control over them and over what's happening. And so asking for minute details is many times an attempt to ease my anxiety. If I just know everything,
Yes.
I will feel better. So what we're really wanting to go after is actually giving our wives safety and assurance that we are working on this. And so I will tell guys, the answer for me would be, no, I'm not going to tell you those details. I will tell you, hey, I crossed that line. I acted out. I looked at porn or whatever.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you those details because, again, we come back to helpful or unhelpful. I've never found that helpful. Never once has the wife been like,
yeah.
well, at least I know.
That. Yeah.
At least, no, it spins and spirals the anxiety, and then they reach for more control. And a wife is never meant to be their husband's sobriety coach. That can't be the role.
Happened, yes.
But when they are in that spot, there's a ton of anxiety. So I would say the details are important, especially when they carry shame for guys to share with other guys. Not with your wife.
And let's talk about that, because I have one friend where her husband was dealing with porn, and the pastor said to her, "You're your husband's accountability partner now."
Yeah, I would disagree with that. Yeah, I would disagree.
The marriage eventually blew up because it was like, here she is trying to be a wife and a mom and all things, and then I now have to manage my husband's porn.
Right.
Like, it's wild.
Well, so when the guy goes a week without looking at porn after seeing it every single day, the wife is not going to throw him a parade for that. She's going to be like, oh, it's about time. And, oh no, is this going to last? And what a guy needs when he's lived with an addiction since a kid is to see progress and have a parade thrown for him. And that's what the role of us, because we're not directly, there's no stab wounds on our side when we experience this. So I can go, bro, I am so proud of you. And he needs a brother, he needs a father, he needs a friend to say that. His wife can't be that because there's too much emotional attachment to
risk.
that. Yeah, you can't do that.
That is really good. I love that. Just to go back, I'm not going to tell you everything, but I will tell you I broke this. And here's my plan of action. I'm going to go tell my friend here. We're going to go to group Monday night.
Right.
That kind of stuff. Are there guardrails in your life that you have to protect you? Do you have like no TV in your room, or do you have codes, or do you do that stuff too? Or do you feel like,
100%.
oh, you do? Okay.
So you had actually said this is like, okay, it's a cycle. It's once every year. And you go, I've been free for a year, and then I wasn't. Then I was free for a year. Then I wasn't. We go, no, that's a cycle.
Yeah.
And so I would say what gets you better keeps you better. And that doesn't mean I have restrictions on my life for the rest of my life. However, I have things in my life that I go, I would be close to the edge if I employed this. Like, so let's say scrolling on YouTube for 2 hours. I may not look at anything at all. And I know that puts me so close to the edge what one ad comes up, and I'm in this passive state already. And then I go like, man, it's been so long. But, so I would say there are a lot of things that I do that I just keep myself on the other side of the guardrail.
Brilliant.
So I go like, it's not like my life feels limited at all, because I've literally never been on Twitter, but I know it's for some people, that's their version of porn, what they use it for. And I go, man, I seriously haven't missed out on anything there. So I have guardrails in my life. Accountability software, I have used that. I find it brilliant for creating a space between you and the thing that you don't want to do. This is just behavior science 101. It's just helpful.
I grew up in a home. My dad was very honest about porn. And I remember my dad saying, my drug of choice is porn. He's like, I have to put guardrails up around me. Yeah. And as a daughter, a lot of times people go, wow, your dad said that. But it wasn't that he was powerless. I felt as a daughter, like, okay, so he would say, like, we would get those, back in the day, you get magazines in your house. Yeah. And they're bathing suit magazines. And I remember him walking in, we were like 12 or 13, he goes, I need you not to leave these around. I don't want to see these in our house. Yeah. And we go, why? And he goes, I'm a man. I'm different than you are. And this isn't helpful for me.
Yeah, that's great.
And it was great, because what he was saying is like, I'm not a pervert, but like, this as a woman doesn't do it for you, but as a man, because I'm different. And I remember there were a lot of things we did in our life as growing up that helped my dad feel safe in our home. Now, again, if he wanted to look at porn, he could have. He would, you can find it. But the goal of like just understanding that who you live with and the triggers they have, if your husband's trying to be sober and you keep having a cocktail every night, just understand like you're not really being kind to the person that's trying to be sober. That's the issue that I feel sometimes with our spouses, is we just don't even think about being kind. Sure. And we kind of demonize their, does that do it for you? Versus like, how can I help you? Like as a friend, not just a spouse. Yeah. So I love those guardrails. We have guardrails as well, Ben and I, in our house. But again, you can't have enough guardrails. If you want to get a drink, you can have a drink. 100%. It just is what it is. Yeah. So as we close, Aaron, this has been awesome. I sit with you and I'm like, you are so courageous, and I love it. I love it for a couple reasons. I think I love it because I live with 5 guys, a husband and 4 boys. And I'm like, thank you. Like our boys need men like you. They need men they can respect, that can actually unpack complicated topics that no one wants to talk about, the most shameful things in our lives. So as a wife and a woman, and as a mom, I'm like, thank you. Thank you for being willing to probably be embarrassed at times and even humiliated at times to fight for freedom, to say, I'll be the embarrassed one. I'll be the one that says this is hard.
Thanks.
And I'll be the guy that maybe is the porn guy, but ultimately you're going to be known as the free guy and the freedom guy. And for a lot of people, you're going to be known as the guy who saved the marriage and saved the parent, like really saved the man. So I just am grateful. If people want to find you, I know there's various things. So we talked about your book, From Numb to Known, and you didn't ask me to talk about this, but I really feel like there's a lot of you watching that need to hear this.
And we'll drop the from, because there's no
Oh,
from.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Numb to Known.
Yeah,
You didn't
that's
ask me
great.
about the title. I could have told you. Okay, so tell us the exact title.
Numb to Known, The Surprising Path Away from Porn.
That's it. Surprising Path. There it is. And
That's
then,
the one.
so you can find that on Amazon.
Yep.
And then how else can people find you?
Well, we do, my wife and I do individual coaching with people as well as couples coaching. So we have a website called zintsquad.com. That also is the place where I have my online small groups that I do for guys who aren't in Reading and can't go to our group. And I do those in like these 3-month cycles. And so, yeah, zintsquad.com. That's
And
the
then
place.
if people are local or willing to drive from Chico or Sacramento, which is
Right.
all possible, however desperate you are, you
totally.
will go. They can find you here.
Yeah, at Bethel Church, it's called the Whole Man Project. We meet on Monday nights at 7 p.m. every single week. And you can definitely go to Bethel's website to find out more info about
I love that. And you also have a podcast.
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you for that.
No, I actually just thought of it as we're talking. I'm like, I should mention that.
It's called Numb to Known, Men Pursuing
Not from
Wholeness.
Numb to Known, people.
Not from. I dropped that from. I like the alliteration there. So, yeah, it's called Numb to Known, and it's just me unpacking this stuff. I take all the things out of my book and put it in a different way, in different order, but nonetheless, it's the same message.
Yeah, I love it. Erin, thank you for being here. Yeah. For all of you guys that are watching, I'm really glad you stuck with us. I hope we answered some of your questions and maybe normalized some of this battle that we live in. And most importantly, I hope that you understand that you are not stuck, that wherever you are, if you are in addiction right now and you are feeling so powerless and humiliated and overwhelmed and ashamed, guess what? We have been there, and there is freedom in this, and like literally a season or a decade of choices is not a life sentence. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. You can get free. If your spouse is stuck in this and you're like, what do I do? First of all, I'm proud of you for watching a podcast like this and not turning it off because you feel powerless. But secondly, we're going to pray for them, that God would give them courage, that as you begin to mention things, their heart would tune to that for freedom. And you first have to start with vulnerability. You have to stop. You can't start with judgment. You can't start with, you need to stop this. You have to start with, I am no longer willing to live with this, or I love you so much that I want you to be free. So you have to start with the eyes. And then also, if you have kids in your home, you have teenage boys, teenage girls, or maybe they live with their dad, they live with their mom at times, and like, I want to get them resourced. There's a couple things you can do. I myself have a course called The Naked Truth About Sexuality, Parenting Teens and Children, and what's appropriate to talk about sexually for them and introduce them, as well as there's a book called The Naked Truth About Sexuality that I wrote on the topic of sexuality. Most importantly, I love that you're here, and I just want you to know that I know there's more to this topic. So when we start talking about these topics, sometimes you can feel like, well, you didn't talk about that. And what about that? Erin and I both know this could be like a full year of episodes on this. That's why he wrote a book, has a podcast. There is more to the story. So if you want more, go find him. And if nothing else, we will be here again next week talking about healthy sexuality, or you can watch the whole series here on YouTube. I love you guys. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.